Hello and welcome to Eric McElroy's American Exchange with me, Eric McElroy. Once again, it's all in the name, really. Well, exciting podcast this week. We're welcoming back Olivia Troye, who first joined us in our first season of the pod 4 years ago. Olivia is brilliant to talk to. She was in the Trump White House working for Mike Pence on homeland security issues and during the COVID response. And she quit in August of 2020 because she couldn't take it anymore. And rather than to quietly squirrel herself away and write a book and then come out with it years later on how she thought that the Trump White House was trouble then, she came out publicly and supported Biden in his campaign against Donald Trump last time. Well, now she's with Republicans for Harris. She spoke at the Democratic National Convention, and she is with us, of course. I mean, it's a natural progression to campaign for Joe Biden, campaign for Kamala Harris, speak at the DNC in front of millions of people, and then join me on the podcast. But she talks about Project 2025, which is the blueprint for the new Trump administration, should they win, written by people that she knows at the Heritage Foundation. So we talked about whether or not that threat is real. Spoiler alert, she says it is. We talk about the role of the vice president. She's worked in the office of the vice president and comparing that to what Kamala's done versus what Pence did. And now that she's coming out of the shadows, Kamala, and why she's coming out of the shadows in the way she is, and why she is someone that Olivia is supporting for president. And also, she's seen Kamala in action. She's been in the room with who I think is the future president of the United States. So we get to hear Olivia's thoughts on that. She's a brilliant guest. She's out there campaigning for Vice President Harris and Tim Walz, and she's with us right now. So please enjoy Olivia Troye. I'm very excited to welcome back someone who was part of the very first season of American Exchange 4 years ago. And most of our conversation back then was about COVID. Remember COVID? Oh, those were good times. But I'm really pleased to welcome her back. Olivia, thank you for coming back on.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me. I can't believe it's been 4 years. Wow.
I can't either. I think it's been a pretty
A
wild
lot
ride for
has
all of
happened.
us. A lot has happened, especially for you. I mean, you have gone from working in the Trump administration, in the White House, with Mike Pence, with Donald Trump, with all that wonderful cast and crew, to speaking at the Democratic National Convention. How, I mean, just personally, wow. How is it to process that must just be intense.
It is. It's a little surreal. I'm not going to lie. It was definitely a different moment being at the DNC, and
Hmm.
it was certainly the largest audience I've ever spoken in front of. So that was also intimidating.
Yeah.
And then just with so much at stake, right? And what's riding in this election in November, and knowing that, well, I was speaking to the building, obviously, the people there who were incredibly supportive. The audience that I was really speaking to were the Republicans and the independent voters at home.
Yeah.
And that's where I focused my speech on, because those were the minds that I'm trying to sway and say, hey, you can, we're trying to create a permission structure and say, hey,
Hmm.
it's okay. It's okay to be, I guess, the red dot in the blue sea, which I was
Yeah.
at the DNC.
Definitely. And I think you saw that with some of the speakers, because I think, I mean, I've spoken to some decent sized crowds in my day. I did one arena gig that was just awful. Don't have time to go into it now, but you could tell that, yeah, you're trying to reach the camera, but then you're also trying to speak to the room. And that's a tricky balance because you want to, the people in front of you instinctually as a speaker, you want to connect with, but you've got to
Yes.
barrel down the camera and think, this is who's really going to be hearing me right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Millions at home. And so, I did my best. I was certainly, it
Yeah.
was nerve wracking, as you can imagine, as I'm sure you know. But I am not a, person that performs in front of crowds normally. I'm a career intel officer who just
Yeah.
happens to be a public figure now. So, as you said, this has definitely been a journey for me. It's been
Hmm.
quite the last 4 years. But one that for me, morally and personally, just really matters so much.
Well, and I think that that actually speaks to what you've done because you were a person that I would imagine before you left the White House, in a normal Republican administration, we may never have actually known what your role was or what you did. And that's not to diminish the work that you did, but there's, thousands of people that work behind the scenes to support any government. And, were in a position that was kind of in that place. Like you weren't looking for the limelight, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I worked in the Trump White House for over 2 years, almost 2.5 years. And I think the entire time it was important that people not know my name. I was definitely the person, I was Mike Pence's Homeland Security advisor. And, when you're in the intel community, you really try to stay behind the scenes, sort of stay in the
Mm,
shadows. And, along the way, I think people saw me with him a lot on the travels and locally and in meetings. So obviously people knew who I was, but
yeah,
I really did not, I never went, was on media. I was not in the public eye whatsoever. And yeah, I could have made the choice. I could have gone to the next assignment in my career and moved on. And I would be an executive serving in some intel agency or some department like DHS and just powering on. And no one would probably even know all the things that I witnessed and lived through. Or, I mean, they would know that, I worked at the Trump White House along the way
mm,
if you were working in the
yeah,
community, right? I mean, and you just happen to know which assignment I'd come from. But other than that, like, I mean, I could have just continued on. Like, and many people did. I've got many
yeah,
colleagues who remain in the community who witnessed a lot of the stuff that I did and who are
mm,
in different roles today. And like, there is an importance to public service, and I don't judge them for that. I just chose to take a very different path because for me, I just felt like it was important to really warn Americans about what this really is. And we're seeing it continue to play out today, right? So
yeah.
nothing has changed in that situation when it comes to Donald Trump.
And I mean, I think that speaks to how important you felt it was, because you definitely could have had a career in that field. You had a career in that field, and then to not be that person who was naturally like, look at me. Like, there's lots of those in politics, and that's not what you were doing. But the fact that you felt it was so important to step forward, I think, is a credit to what you've done. So, you know,
Thank you.
yeah, I appreciate it, and I think people do, and it obviously shows because, you know, to get to the point where you are chosen to be one of those voices to speak at the DNC, that's incredible. And again, I just when I heard your name announced, because I didn't still watch the whole thing, partly because of the time zone difference, because I'm in London, of course. But then I was like, I know her. I was like, oh my God, it's like this is so cool. But just incredible to see your you come through and make that statement and everything else. I guess one of the places, I suppose, if you'd stayed in that ecosystem that you could have ended up would have been the Heritage Foundation, where they wrote Project 2025. As
Yes,
someone who I guess probably knows people that have gone to the Heritage Foundation, knows people that
many.
have participated in that, how real, because Donald Trump has said that this is not a blueprint for what he wants to do, they've written it as a blueprint for what his administration would do. How seriously should we take it?
Uh, I mean, you should take it very seriously. You kind of mentioned this. I actually spent my summers at Heritage Foundation when I was younger. It
Oh
is,
my God.
yeah, it's very real. But I'll say that the Heritage Foundation that I knew maybe 20 years ago, when you're interning
Yeah.
on the Hill and you're a college student and you're going to the Heritage Foundation, like summer internships and programs that they do for interns in DC, which are the ones that I participated in.
Hmm.
Um, I would say that Heritage Foundation, while conservative, right? It was always a conservative think tank. Heritage was a fairly respected
Yeah.
conservative think tank, I would say, right? I mean, where Ronald Reagan was like sort of the sort of the pinnacle and doctrine and for true Republicans, like that is kind of the think tank where people would rotate in and out of people that serve in Republican administrations. I know many people that have served, like worked there along the way. And I would say that it is a very different place that it
Hmm.
was many years ago.
Yeah.
It has changed. And I think it has followed the trajectory of the Republican Party, I would say. Like, because to me, the GOP of today doesn't represent like the traditional conservative values that I think
Hmm.
myself and others have identified along the way. And I think the Heritage Foundation has followed that trajectory.
Yeah.
I know people who were former executives there who look at it and are appalled at what's happening
Wow.
there. So I would say that that speaks volumes
Hmm.
about how many of us are feeling about what has taken place. I'll say Project 2025 to me is incredibly concerning because I saw some of the versions of executive orders and some of the things that they are sort of delivering in that plan. I
Right.
saw that being drafted and worked on and sort of espoused upon, talked about during the first Trump administration. So when I see
Mm,
Donald Trump saying, I know nothing about it, I'm like, are you kidding me? Those are the policy meetings I sat in. It sounds exactly. It's like parodying the talking points of what Stephen Miller and a lot of these people would say in cabinet meetings when they'd sit
mm,
there and berate members of the Trump cabinet because they wanted that agenda pushed. So, like, that is very real. The purging of the
mm,
federal service. I saw that draft in 2020. I saw the Schedule F executive order. And I saw it, by the way, because I had like senior political people say to me, you need to be aware of this, but keep your head down. Keep your
right.
head down and you'll be just fine. And
Jesus.
I can't tell you what it feels like to hear that from somebody that you respect. And like by that point, I'll be very blunt. I'd been working my ass off
Mm,
during all 4 years in the Trump administration, just fire after fire, crisis after crisis. And then, of course, you mentioned the COVID pandemic. And I'm sitting there in 2020 thinking to myself, like, are you kidding me? Keep my head down. Like, everyone in this White House knows me. Across the US government, people know my name. Like, I am working my butt off to like figure out how to control the chaos and actually not cause significant damage to all our institutions because this is
mm,
like such a critical time. And I just remember, and by the way, I'm serving to the best of my ability
mm,
as much as I can, like in a nonpartisan way, right? Because that's what
yeah.
you do in public service. And so to hear that and then to see the draft and saying that they were going to replace anyone in a
Mm,
position that touched policy is frightening because that means you're replacing an entire cadre of people with loyalists and a bunch of people and replacing them with people who don't have the extensive experience. And it
yeah.
covers so many different areas, right, Eric? Like it whether it's reproductive like rights,
Yeah.
birth control, whether it covers the Department of Homeland Security when it comes to immigration and the planned raids that they want to do and how they want to execute them, whether it comes to disaster relief and the funds they're going to cut, or NOAA, they want to cut the EPA and they want to cut NOAA. So what, we're just not going to track the weather now and hurricanes aren't real? I mean, you know, that's the kind of thing that's, I think, in the weeds that I think a lot of people don't really understand that there's something in there for everyone. Like if you
Yeah.
think that it has nothing to do with you and it's not going to impact you, I promise you that it is. I mean, it's 900 pages of doctrine.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that it doesn't cut through to the no to the average person because, I mean, I'm a political geek on the sidelines. You're immersed in all of this for your life's work, but for the average person who, like I've got family, they're teachers, they're just normal regular folk, and that it doesn't get trickle through because they're busy living their lives and they don't realize that it's actually all been laid out in front of us exactly what is going to happen. There won't be any surprises if Trump wins. He's told us what he's
No,
going to do.
yeah. I mean, he's been very, the one thing about Donald Trump is he just tells you, he says everything out loud, whether it makes any sense or not half the time, but he
Yeah.
does tell you what he's going to do, right? He's like,
Mm,
oh, my best friend's Putin. And then he goes out and parrots the Kremlin when he talks,
yeah.
right? I mean, so like he's it's not like he's secret squirrel spy like in the intel community where we keep our secrets and tradecraft to ourselves. He just tells you, right? He actually can't even keep our tradecraft to himself, as you've
Yeah.
seen. Like he'll just spill it. So I think you're right that people are busy living their lives, and to sit there and say, hey, are you aware of this 900-page plan? They're like, no, man, I'm trying to get my kids to school. I'm trying to like figure out how I'm going to pay the bills, like what's going on. I mean, my community, I'm dealing with mass shootings at schools. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
there's all these things that are happening. So I think you're absolutely right. Like, I don't expect the average person to be sitting there thinking, oh, Project 2025, have you heard of this? You should be like really paying attention to what's happening. But I think that therefore there's a responsibility then,
Mm,
which is I think what the Harris Walz campaign is doing, and other people are doing to really educate the public and do it in a tangible way, right? Like when
yeah.
I talk about Project 2025, I don't sit there and say, hey, there's a think tank for 900 pages. It's this whole policy doctrine. Like I really just kind of break down. I think we just got to start talking about, hey, did you know that they want to track miscarriages across the country? That's an invasion of your privacy, of
Yeah.
your health. And like that's a conversation that's happening with your family, your doctors, and like the government has no business paying attention to that. Why? Why are they doing that? Like,
Yeah.
so to me, I explain it as like, are you aware that as much as a Republican as I am, I believe in individual liberties and privacy and limited government. And there is a plan that actually flips the script on that, turns it upside down on its head, and it's
Mm.
complete government overreach. And so if you care about things like that, just take the time to educate yourself on what Project 2025 is and just pay attention, because I know that we're like, whatever crisis that we're dealing with right now and the challenge that we have, it's about to get a lot harder if these people come into office, because they are going to start to control and strip rights. I mean, they're going to be controlling the Department of Education. I think they actually want to defund the Department of Education,
Yeah.
which to me is pretty disturbing. I mean, I grew up watching public broadcast TV. I
Yeah.
learned English on Sesame Street. There, I'm sharing some insights. I mean, I was watching, Elmo and Cookie Monster and Mr. Rogers, and that was
Yeah.
really critical for me to actually learn English because I was
Mm.
a fluent Spanish speaker. I was a daughter
Yeah.
of immigrants. And so that's why public education matters, right? My parents couldn't afford to send
Mm.
me to private school. I
Yeah.
I went to public school my entire life. Like, I mean, so I when you break it down like that, I think that's what's at stake here is control, and also just pushing an agenda in a very specific mindset that they have on how they believe society should be. So no
Mm.
freedom of religion. It's religion in the way that they see it,
Yeah.
right? Which is very much like Christian nationalism. And I happen to believe in the separation of church and state. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Um, Things, by the way, again, that were traditionally, I thought, part of the Republican Party, but here we
Yeah.
are.
It's a different. Oh, that, I mean, and it would. I guess the irony of that, of course, is you can tell Trump is not religious. I mean, you worked for Mike Pence,
Yeah,
who was clearly religious, probably a little too much for my taste, but you saw that contradiction. Trump doesn't give a shit about religion.
I I'm look, I'm telling you 100% the truth. I never saw Donald Trump pray once during my entire tenure in that White House.
Yeah.
Like, I saw Mike Pence pray every single day.
Mm.
So,
Like,
so as you know, I think he is a man who really walks the talk on his faith. Like,
mm.
we have differing opinions on policy. We certainly differed on things, but I will say that that is who he is, and
Yeah.
in moments of crisis, that's what he chose to do. And sometimes he ran staff meetings with that.
Mm.
Um, whether that separation of church and state is a different conversation we could have along,
Yeah.
especially as, national security people. I do remember leaning over to somebody and being like, I know this is going to be a little weird, but it just, I'll explain it to you later, when somebody new would start on staff. And I mean, because they would just be a little bit confused, but I just
Yeah.
say that because, like, at least Mike Pence isn't a hypocrite
Yeah.
about what he's presenting to the evangelical and Christian community when he talks about his faith, because he really does live it and believe it. We
Yeah.
have a complete hypocrite in Donald Trump, who somehow has managed to co-opt evangelical churches and circles for his own benefit and his own personal gain, when he really is the antithesis of
Yeah.
anything that I would think about when I think about, like, Christian values, right? But here we are. But there's
Yeah.
hope.
Well,
There are
there is hope.
evangelicals for Harris
Yeah. Which
who
is
have
brilliant because
recently
I
come
mean,
forward.
because the transactionalism of some of these evangelical leaders to tie themselves to Trump for short-term gains. I mean, I'm not a Bible
Yeah.
person, but I know there's a quote about losing your soul. It's, I can't remember what it is, but it's it. Yeah, I wonder those times, those photos of when all the evangelicals would come in and put their hands on Trump and pray on him. I don't know if you
That was
remember
so weird.
those.
Oh yeah, that was
And
weird.
you just wonder what was going through Trump's mind because he's not. I mean,
Oh,
I'm
is
sure
all
he's
it
thinking it's
look.
disgusting that they're touching me. That's probably what he's thinking.
Oh yeah, yeah, actually, for sure. Because I mean, I've heard him say that he doesn't like to be touched, and he thinks people are disgusting. He's a germaphobe. Um, and yeah, I'm sure that was part of it. I everything's we saw this at Arlington Cemetery recently. Everything is a photo
Yeah.
op for him. That's all it is. He doesn't care about the substance in the moment. Like, the contrast again. I would see Mike Pence actually pull people aside and have a serious conversation with them
Hmm.
about whatever the topic was. Donald Trump would roll in, look for the camera immediately,
Hmm.
and sat there. And I mean, everything is a photo op for him. Nothing is of substance. He doesn't care about any of this. Like, we just saw that at Arlington Cemetery again, where a person just pushed aside, right, and yelled at. just for doing their job. And all they're doing is following the rules. There are
Yeah.
rules that are sacred ground at Arlington Cemetery, right? That's why they exist. It shouldn't be politicized. But for
I was going to
him,
ask you about
he
that
wanted that.
because when we talked 4 years ago, that was right in the aftermath of him pushing aside the protesters in DC with police and horses and everything else, and
Yeah.
standing with an upside down Bible in front of a church that he allegedly was
Mm,
trying to protect. The
hmm
symbolism of what he has burned through, and especially because you've worked with the military and with, in Homeland Security. I mean, for a because a lot of our listeners are non-American, what he did at Arlington and that photo op in that place where these people who have just been our most recent conflicts. I mean, do you think that is going
mm.
to have real because it doesn't seem like anything breaks through, but do you think that will with the people that serve?
Yes. Um,
Mm,
because I think that is crossing so many red lines.
yeah,
And I think now there's a pattern, right? I mean, there's always that's the thing with Donald Trump. There's always a pattern of behavior
yeah,
that he proves himself to be that person that lacks character when it comes to understanding what it means to serve,
yeah.
what it means to sacrifice for your country. He has no understanding of that because he's never done it. And by the way, most of his inner circle, these enablers that are still with him today, don't really understand what it truly means to serve.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think, I mean, we saw it. We saw John McCain's son come forward and say enough.
Mm,
He announced, like, I'm leaving the Republican Party. He went that far. He said, I'm becoming a Democrat. I'm changing this. This is not okay. He was very offended by what happened at Arlington Cemetery. And, I think what is really disturbing to me is watching the disinformation that is being
mm,
pushed out by the Trump campaign, by the manipulation of these Gold Star families who are
yeah.
grieving their loved ones and their losses, which is awful. We all grieve them too, right? We
Mm,
understand, like, this is an awful situation that happened. No one is taking that away or disparaging that, but I think it is disturbing the way he's manipulated the situation for his own political gain.
yeah.
And we're seeing these videos where they're like, but the families wanted them there. I'm not disagreeing. I'm not saying that he wasn't invited by them. What
Yeah.
I'm saying is that he was told that there is a section there where no cameras were allowed. One photographer, I believe, had been identified that would go and, like, take a picture with the family.
Yeah.
And they chose to override the rules, creating an altercation, not at the site, by the way, not in section 60, I believe is what it's called. And I think the families are like, oh, I didn't see anything. And they're pushing out these people that are
Mm,
saying, oh, I didn't see it. Well, yeah, because that person that's there, from what I have seen, is a consummate professional who's not going to make a scene right at the
yeah.
grave site. So where it happened was when and I'm telling you this, I'm giving you a vivid description because I've been in the motor pool, like motorcade, and I've
Mm,
seen the press pool where you get out of the vans and you start running. And sometimes the media will run to get into place. And so
right.
they were probably told the direction of where to go to
Mm,
do the photos and the footage. And then you had these people that were going rogue. And so this person says, hey, no, you
right.
can't go that way. And then there's a physical altercation and yelling that happens, not right where the ceremony is happening, but
Yeah.
in the area where the motorcade's getting out, right? Like, and
Yeah.
so that's where it happens. So it's all disinformation when you see these videos that are being pushed on social media right now, where we're like, I didn't see anything. And you have interviews happening on Fox News. I watched one of them where this woman was like, I don't know what they're talking about. Like, and I'm like, yeah. And you know what? It's a credit to that public servant that you don't know what they're talking about, that you didn't see it,
Yeah.
because they were preserving the sacred ground, unlike what Donald Trump was trying to do. Right? They were trying to kind of figure out how to diffuse the situation
Mm,
in the background, and then this poor person gets, you know, basically attacked by
but
the
yeah.
Trump team.
Well, and then
And
attacks.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
online saying
publicly,
that she
right?
was disturbed,
Yes,
yeah, and everything else. So, I mean,
deranged.
the fact that you have to be in fear from your former president is such a un-American as it gets. I mean, that was the whole, well, yeah, it just it's absurd.
Yeah, yeah, we are certainly living in a different time for a country, and it's really just it's hard to watch, right? To think that this is the United States right now and this is where we
Yeah.
are. But yeah, and I say this just because we're talking about the evangelicals praying on him, photo op. Arlington Cemetery is a photo op. Like, it's not, this is a guy who called the military losers, right? I mean,
Yeah.
suckers and losers. So once again, he has shown us what he thinks about military service members. in
Yeah.
plain view.
Well,
Like he doesn't care.
it it's what he thinks about anyone who does something beyond themselves. I mean, I think that's why he's so baffled and still struggles with Biden stepping down because he could not conceive of doing that. And I think that's why it's thrown
Yeah.
him. And self-sacrifice is that is the as anti-Trump as it gets. You can't self-sacrifice and Trump are two things that don't go together. I'm cautious of time, so I had two other things I wanted to quickly talk to you about if we
Yeah.
could squeeze in. One is this you worked as with a vice president. So Kamala is now obviously gone from the role of the vice president into, the front seat as the lead candidate. And the argument I get against her when I talk to people who are not Trump supporters, but they're like, I don't like either of them. And
Mhm.
and there's this they say something that I think is fantastic. This is way the vice president. She didn't do anything as vice president, which is kind of what. And at the same time, she also led the coup to overthrow the president of the United States, Joe Biden. So there's this like they say in the same breath, she was useless and didn't do anything, but then also led the coup against Biden. Um, I mean, you worked for vice president. Their role is to be kind of in the background, no matter who the
Yes.
president is. Even, I mean, Trump is obviously exceptional and always needed the attention, but in general, it's a weird job because the job description is just be there in case of emergency.
Yeah, and you really, I mean, you can certainly advise and give input on policy, but at the end of the day, it really is sort of the person in the Oval Office who's driving everything,
Yeah.
right? That's just to be clear. I mean, that's how it works. And I think it is hard um, in any administration for the vice president that's serving in that role because you're trying to navigate how you sort of pave your own way
Mm.
in the role, right? And I think it's a hard balance because you also you're trying to not you don't want to outshine the person in the Oval Office, right? There's sort of a deferential respect.
Yeah.
Trust me, you definitely did not want to outshine Trump because like I mean, he was a little sensitive. When Mike Pence's press conference started to go a little too well, he got mad. He was
Huh.
furious, and then he started crashing them.
I
So
remember that during COVID.
yes,
Yes. Oh God.
yeah, we were like sitting there. Mike Pence would look at me, and I'm just giving you inside baseball on what it's like to be in the vice presidential role, right? Because
Yeah.
he would look at me and say, "Do you think I get to talk today?" That was our joke, and I would say
God.
back to him, I hope so because I spent an hour prepping you and it was super stressful. So like I really hope you get to talk today because your staff has really been stressed out for the past 3 hours in preparation for this press conference. We just prepped you and and they're not easy to prep
Yeah.
the principals in these situations because they're stressed out and they're trying to figure out and they're making changes to remarks and as a staffer, you're trying to serve in the best role way possible. And you're
Mm.
stressed out as well, right? Because you want the principal to do a good job and you're just there to kind of
Yeah.
inform and advise. Yeah. So I say that because that is the day in the life of the vice president. Like how you sort of manage in this space. I do think I'm glad to see Kamala Harris now sort of out in front and out
Yeah.
on the campaign trail because I think to your point about how people view her, I think she has been playing her role and she's played it well,
Mm.
right? She's traveled internationally. She traveled to the tri-border region. I know they try to paint her as a border czar, the Trump team does, and the
Yeah.
Republicans do. I say, well, okay, if you want to call her the border czar, then sure, let her have that title because she was actually out traveling to the countries, dealing with the root causes of migration and actually doing true foreign policy
Yeah.
as the vice president. It's just that that's not going to be the main headline because that's not her role. Her role is to support the president and drive forward the policy as a member of the team,
Yeah.
right? And also, by the way, the vice president sometimes puts out fires behind the scenes, like meets with the
Mm.
cabinet, and is like, it's kind of a complicated role because sometimes you're trying to figure out like how you balance these relationships across the cabinet members and if there's something like a legislation or something that you're working on, right? Like an executive order
Yeah.
and there's tension there. I mean, you're kind of like dealing with the inside baseball of like, how do you get it across the finish line and how do you help the president's agenda? I mean, so it's just a very complicated role. And I think, but the
Mm.
problem is you don't get the spotlight on
Yeah.
it. Right. And so you may be doing all this work. And I certainly saw Mike Pence do it where like people just will never know. Right.
Mm.
Like people will never know that when we talk about speaking of photo ops or we talk about Trump's immigration agenda, and evangelicals, all of those combined, by the way, I have examples for those different types of agendas coming together. People will never know that we were getting the phone calls from the
Yeah.
evangelical groups. They were calling the vice president's office. We were putting out those fires. He was the one on the
Mm.
phone calling these people and explaining, which, by the way, is very complicated and very hard to explain when you don't actually agree sometimes with what's happening, but you have to go along with it.
Yeah.
Explaining to them, oh, I apologize, the fact that we're reducing the refugee ceiling. And I know that that is something that evangelical groups and these, nonprofits and organizations care about, or explaining to them why we were separating children at the border, and evangelical groups and Christian organizations were horrified at
Mm.
this extreme immigration policy, and they were calling our office.
Yeah.
Like, so there's numerous things that are happening there that people are dealing with. Now, I'm giving you extreme examples of what it was like in the Trump administration, right?
Mm.
Fortunately, we have a rational president in power right now that is actually just trying to do good policy for the American people and dealing with complicated situations in the Middle East and international foreign policy and trying to navigate that. And so part of the role of the vice president is to also help navigate that
Yeah.
behind the scenes and travel to summits, right? She traveled to the Munich summit. She
Mm.
traveled and did like influential diplomacy,
Yeah.
right? But I think that is her role. Her role is not to be the front and center face of everything. And so I think people are going to get to know her a little more.
Mm.
I had the opportunity to travel with her in Michigan, and she did an event with conservative women on
Mm.
reproductive rights. And I left there with a very different impression than I first had initially had of her. She
Wow.
was someone,
Okay.
I mean, she was very willing to have these open and honest conversations and extend, sort of a bridge, like extend grace to others of differing opinions and say, we're in this together. I understand how personal this is. And I understand that it's a decision between you, your doctors, and your faith. But let's have a conversation about it.
Mm.
And I got a lot of great feedback from the event, from Republican women, from independent voters who were like, it was really nice to get to know her in that way
Mm.
and have just very open conversations. That was the aftermath of it, right? It's
Wow.
just, so I think that I hope that that's what's happening now. The more that her and Tim Walz get on the campaign trail, where you're really getting to know her and her own policy, because she does have different policy. I mean, than Joe Biden does, right? They're different
Yeah.
people. But it's
Yeah. Of
hard.
course.
Like, how do you thread the needle on that
Yeah.
while
And
you're a
not feel.
candidate and there's a sitting
Yeah.
president? We've never had this, right? It's unprecedented. But
Yeah.
um, so it's challenging. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, it's incredible that you can get to be in the room and see or interact and that kind of stuff. That's always incredible to imagine. Um, just so maybe some quick final questions. How big of it do you think it is that Liz Cheney has said that she's going to vote for? I mean, that's monumental for a Cheney to say the words, "I'm going to vote for a Democrat." I mean, it's. Do you think that will bring people over who are still consider themselves on the Republican fence?
Yeah, I think so. I think every voice in the space matters. And I think it really, again, it's about creating sort of a permission structure for uh, sort of Republicans to go against their party identity, because party
Yeah.
identity is real, as you know, right?
Mm,
I mean, people, it's hard. Like, you have a lot of Republicans out there who are just straight ticket voters who are used to voting Republican no matter what, no matter who's on the
yeah.
ticket their entire lives. But I do think that the tide is changing. I think things are, um, because I was just in Arizona. I was talking to Republicans out there, and there's a change. There's a change happening.
Mm,
I think that they're tired and exhausted of having to explain Donald Trump
yeah.
to others, right?
It's getting
Because he
old.
is,
It's an old shtick now.
yeah,
It's not.
yeah, and it's exhausting and it's ugly and it's divisive, and like, nobody wants to live this way, right? I mean,
Yeah.
except for whatever, a small cadre of people who continue to follow him.
Mm,
But when you take a step back, you're just kind of watching this and being like, why do I want to be a part of this, and why do I want to enable that? Now, I think, look, it's not just Donald Trump. I think Trumpism is here. MAGA's here to stay for a while. It's bigger than
yeah.
him. But I do think that for what I message to independents and Republicans is like, we can make a huge difference in defeating that extreme arm of what this is, of the Republican Party by defeating him. It starts by defeating him. And
Yeah.
then we continue to kind of figure out how we rebuild this. Maybe we'll get there, maybe we won't. And I think people like Liz Cheney, people like Jeff, Lieutenant Governor, the former Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, who spoke after I did at the convention, Adam Kinzinger, I think we're out here just saying, like, this isn't about Republican or Democrat right now in the moment. It is really about doing the best thing for our country together so that we can get past this moment. And,
Yeah.
like I saw Pete Buttigieg in the hall at the DNC, and he walked up to me and he said, "Thank you for what you're doing." And I said, I appreciate that. It
Yeah.
is a hard space to be in. And he's like, "I know it is." And then he said, "I hope that someday we can get back to arguing about whatever we used to argue about between Republicans and Democrats." He's like, "I look forward to arguing with you about taxes." And I was like, "Me too."
Yeah.
But I mean, like, nowadays we'd sit around and be like, I don't know that there all these things that we used to split hairs on. I don't know that right now in this moment is a critical piece to be arguing about when there's so much at stake. And we're watching Donald Trump align himself with people like Viktor Orban, Putin,
Yeah.
right? Dictators, basically. And there's a rise of authoritarianism around the world. And I think it's happening. We're seeing it happening here in the United States. And it's frightening. And I
Yeah.
think we've got to do everything we can to push back on what this is.
Yeah, I think that's a longer term fight that's going to be there, regardless of what happens to Trump this
Yes.
time. It'll be if defeating Trump this time is the first step in holding against that, but
Yeah.
and
And
then it
it's a global
continues from
fight.
there. Yeah, oh,
Right.
definitely. We saw it with what happened in Germany with the far right party winning there, and it's going to continue. My final question is: Kamala has said that she wants a Republican in her cabinet. What do you think,
Yeah.
Olivia?
That was amazing news,
Secretary
right?
of what would you like your portfolio to be?
Thanks. That's very flattering. I'm just trying to get through one day at a time right now in my life. So.
You
But I
never
was
know.
pleased to see that. I was pleased to
Yeah.
see that. Look, I think it's important again because I think it tells. I think what she is saying is that you are welcome.
Mm,
You are welcome in this broader coalition, and you will have a role. And I think that's important. I think that goes along with what Liz Cheney is saying that she's supporting Kamala Harris. Like, I think Kamala Harris is in return is saying, I want different opinions. We're stronger when we have differing opinions at the table, right? And makes like
yeah.
policy stronger. I'm a big believer in that when you have debate and you kind of talk through it and you find the best way forward for all of us as Americans. I think that's critically important. And it's just such a direct contrast to Donald Trump, who, you know, is not going to have actually any sane, rational Republican sitting in that cabinet. I
Yeah.
mean, you're going to be the cast of characters sitting at that cabinet table, should he return, are going to be like the Kash Patels, Rick Grinnell's,
Yeah.
Mike Flynn's. I mean, what's Steve Bannon? What's he going to be doing? Is he going to be running comms from jail? I mean,
Yeah.
Peter
There's gonna be at
Navarro.
least, yeah, 3 or 4 felons at the table,
Yeah,
including the
Tucker
president.
Carlson. Yeah, who knows? Tucker Carlson will be Secretary of State. Think
Oh,
about that though, because it's very real,
yeah.
right? We talk in hyperbole, but those are the kind of the characters that he'll have. And so I think it's in direct contrast to Kamala Harris, who's saying, like, I will have a member, like, I'll have a Republican on a cabinet. I'm not opposed to that. I'm going to
Mhm.
have responsible people. Like, she's just trying to build a coalition that's best for governing the country. And I think
Yeah.
that is in stark contrast to what a Donald Trump presidency would come with. And I welcome that. I'm really glad that she said that because I think to a lot of voters right now who are on the fence are watching that and they're saying, okay,
Yeah.
all right, well, I'll have my voice will be at the table, like, or my politics will be at the table at
Mm.
least.
Well, and for you speaking out and traveling the country and campaigning as a Republican, that you can point to that and say, look, this is somebody who is not just transactionally using us like the other guy would. This is
Yeah.
a real level of support that we're going to get and a voice that's heard. So that's brilliant. So, well, I'll let you get on to that. And thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me again. And good luck on the campaign trail. Stay safe.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a challenging time for sure. I won't play for you some of the voicemails that I'm getting, but they
Oh
really tell me to
man.
go back to Mexico a lot. And I keep trying to remind them that I'm a US citizen, but that's okay. They don't think they understand
Yeah, I think nuance is lost there. But yeah, well, I know because you're not just a U.S. citizen, you're a Texan, which you don't want to mess with that at all. So
that. Exactly.
there you go. Thanks so much, Olivia. There we have it. That was Olivia once again. Incredible to get the insight. She's a person who's in the room as history is happening, both in the Pence administration and now having gone through this incredible transformation, and now is actually in the room with Vice President Harris. So just as a personal story, I find it fascinating to see someone who's gone all the way from being in the, working with the people on the far right to now helping and supporting people on the left, because she's not standing up for one party or another. She's standing up for the country, which as an American, we like this patriotism kind of thing. She's done incredible outreach so far. She's working with Republicans to try and bring them aboard to vote for democracy and vote for not the cult leader, which, is maybe a good thing. I think so. She easily could have had a quiet life, but she's decided to stay in the mix, and she's out there campaigning for Harris and, of course, joining us. So thank you again to her for coming on. Thank you to Mark, the producer, for putting everything together. Thank you, dear listener, for joining us once again. Please like, subscribe, do whatever you do on the different platforms you're watching this on. Please share the podcast. And for the love of God, if you're an American, vote. Make sure you're registered, votefromabroad.org. If you're outside of the US, you can get registered to vote. There's still time. You got to stay on it. You got to follow up with it, but there's still time to vote and make a difference. And every vote will send a message to the powers that be. So please vote. Please subscribe. Please listen to the next episode. And thank you again to everyone. And see you next time. Bye-bye.